So at the end, they have also given the information about migration and the IAM, including the monitoring as well. So I'll be sharing this PDF link in the chat window, and you can refer this. And now we'll move on to our hands-on activity. So this is the official documentation of this AWS code commit. Now, coming back over here. Here, I'm going to create a new repository. So in order to create a new repository, I'm going to say create repository. And also, this is an activity on Git. So here, in order to perform the activity on the Git, as you know, we would require a Git bash. So that is also set up in my system. Now, I'm going to create a new repository. I'm going to say the repository name as let's say my repo. Okay, this is the repository name that I'm going to create. And here we'll have to mention the description. I'm going to say creating a demo repository. It is just an optional. So I'll say creating the demo repository, and we can add tags. I'm going to say my tag as name, and my repository name is my underscore repo. Now, once this is done, so I'll just come below and I'll click this create button. If I click this create button, it's going to initialize a new repository for us. Now, for our repository, we can set up the connection using HTTPS, or we can also make use of SSH, or we can also make use of GRC way of communication as well. So what I want you to do is, I want you to I want you to copy this link, so which we call it as cloning the repository link using HTTPS. So I'll click on this copy button and I'll just note it down over here. So I'll note down the complete command over here because we'll be using it whenever we are cloning this to our local system. Now this has been completed. So step one is we have created our own code commit repository. Now the next important thing that we have to do is we'll have to set up for HTTPS users using Git credentials. That means for the user ID, we will have to generate the Git credentials. This credentials is what we will be using. Yes, this is what we'll be using to configure the repository and to communicate with my local repository to this cloud repository of code commit. Now, in order to do this, obviously, every access in AWS is being controlled with IAM, that is Identity and Access Management. I'll go over here and I'll search for the service of IAM. And also remember the region in which that you are working. So by default, currently I'm working in US East 1. So that's the default region that I have considered. Ensure that you note down, and when you're creating any bucket, so it's all present in the same region. Now, I'm in my IAM, that is Identity and Access Management. Now here, the next thing that we have to do is we'll have to configure our IAM user to access the code commit. That means we will have to ensure that the user ID which we are using, this user ID has the access to has the relevant permission in order to communicate with this AWS code commit and perform the required action. So let's do one thing. Let's give the code commit access to the user that we are currently logged in. Now, in order to do that, I'll just go over here and I'm going to click on my users. Okay. So this is the user that I'm logged into. I'll go inside my user. And for this user, let's add the permission. So I'm going to click on add permission and I'll attach the existing policies directly. Here, I'm going to add the policy, and this policy, let's search for AWS code commit. Now we've got various policies that are available. So if I open this, so AWS code commit power user, it's going to tell me what are the actions that is allowed for this AWS code commit power user. So for the code commit, it has list tagging and read and write access are available for this code commit. That is what I'm interested in. Apart from that, we also have the access to the code star notification, event bridge, which is very similar to what we had earlier. That is the logging side. And so I think this looks fine for me. So what I can do right now is I'm going to attach this policy. I'll attach this policy for my existing user. Now, by attaching this policy, I'll ensure that my user, the user that I'm logged in, he has all the necessary permissions to communicate with this AWS code commit. So in order to attach, I'll just select this permission, that is this policy, and I'll click on this review button. And I'm going to say add permission. So this has added the permission. See, this has added the permission to my user that I'm currently logged in. Okay. So once this is done, we also need the credentials so that we can communicate with with our local repository to the code commit repository. So in order to do that, here I'm gonna click on this security credentials for the user ID that we are working. And here we can generate the SSH keys for code commit, and we can also get the HTTPS Git credentials for code commit. Now, what I'll be doing right now is we'll be generating the credentials for HTTPS Git credentials for AWS code commit. In order to do this, I'm gonna say generate credentials. Okay, so this has generated the credentials, and I'm gonna copy this. Okay, so this will help me in specifying at a later stage. And for password, I'll note down. So don't share these user ID and password since it's a practice system, like my personal system. So this will be cleared once I will ensure that it will be cleared once it's done. But if you're someone who is practicing it, don't share these credentials with anyone. So once I've generated this Git credentials, the next thing that we have to do is we just have to connect our code commit, and we'll just go ahead and clone the repository. Now, for the demonstration purpose, I'm going to use a folder in my local system. I'll open my local system. Okay. Now in this local system, okay. So here I've created a folder that is called as AWS CC. Okay. So I'll rename it to AWS Live. So this is a folder that I have created right here. Now in this folder, we are going to clone the repository. In order to do that, I'm going to start the git bash. So I've started this git bash. Now let's go ahead and clone this repository. In order to clone this, I'll bring back the code that we have got earlier, git clone https git commit, and I'll paste this, and I'll press the space, and I can mention my local repository name. I'm going to say local-repo. But in order to do this effectively by running the command and directly performing the cloning with GitHub repository, there is a special configuration that you have to do in the scenario, guys, that is in the git configuration file. There's a line that you need to add to ensure that you're not getting the error. In order to do this, I'll do one thing. I'll note down each and everything in the notepad so that I can share it with you at the end of the session. So first thing is, so here what you have to do is you'll have to go to a path that's called as, so you'll have to go to the path C program files. I'll mention it right here. So I'll share this with you at the end of the session. This is the important configuration that you have to do. Program files, and then git etc git config. Okay, there's a file that's called as git config in this path, and I'll show you. So I'll go to the C, program files, and Git. Under the Git, there's a folder that's called as etc, and there's a file that's called as git config. See, this is the file that's called as git config, and you can open this with the notepad. It should work. If you open it up with the notepad, it would look something like this. Here, you need to add this code which mentions the credential. Here, the credential, it says credentials git commit star.amazonaws.com. This is what you have to add it as an extra in this git config file, else you will not be able to run the command. So I'll copy this and I'll share it over here in this document, and you can modify the file and add below code. And I'll mention it in different colors so that you can understand. Okay, this is what you need to add while performing this in a hands-on manner. Okay, now once this is done, you can come and you can just run this command. So the command that I'm currently running right now is this. So repo clone. So here, this is my repository link. You have to replace it with your own repository. I'm just changing the color, but you have to replace it with your own repository. And I'm going to say local-repo. Okay, so let's go ahead and perform this cloning.